One might argue that if Emmerich had simply read the prophecy with his own two eyes, instead of taking it second-hand from the woman who had written it, he would never have thrown his pregnant mate out into the snow. But then again, if the Alpha of Verith had ever once in his life questioned the people who told him what to believe, he would never have needed a prophecy at all. So really, if one thought about it, honestly, the whole ruin of it was his fault, all of it. Every last footprint Orla left in the frozen dark. Orla had been born a tracker, and a tracker learns young that the world tells the truth if you are patient enough to read it. She had read men in the field for 9 winters, and been wrong about them exactly, never. It was, she would think later, a bitter joke that the one time it mattered most, she had read her own mate and gotten every last letter of him wrong. The whole of Verith had gathered in the moot yard beneath a sky, the color of old iron. 400 faces Orla had guarded and hunted for, and bled beside, and every one of them was looking at her belly. She was 7 months heavy, carried low and wide, and had felt 3 separate heartbeats under her ribs since the first thaw, which the healer had gone pale over and then refused to speak of again. 3. Unheard of. A litter fit for a founding line. The whole pack had whispered, when the news first broke, back when the whispering had still been kind. It was not kind now. Say it plainly, Orla told him, because her voice had never learned to be small. Whatever this is, Emmerich, say it to my face, and not to the yard. Emmerich stood on the mounting stone with the torchlight sliding off the gray at his temples, and he could not look at her. That was the thing that frightened her, more than the crowd, more than the cold. Emmerich, who had claimed her in front of the gods and told her she was the truest thing in a lying world, could not bring his eyes to hers. The moon speaker has read the bones, he said. His voice carried. It always carried. It was made to. She has read them 9 nights running, and they say the same thing every night. Beside him stood Morwen. The moon speaker was a narrow old woman with a face like a kind winter, all soft lines and pale eyes, and she had been the nearest thing to a mother Orla had ever owned. Morwen had found her at 11, a half-feral orphan sleeping in the kennels, and Morwen had taught her to read the world. Everything Orla trusted about her own 2 eyes, she had learned at this woman's knee. So, when Morwen stepped forward now and folded her spotted hands and looked at Orla with grief carved deep into every line of her, Orla's first traitor instinct was to believe her. The children she carries are 3, Morwen said softly, to the yard, and the bones say that 3 born together to this bloodline will pull down everything we have built. Fire in the storehouses, the gates thrown open in the night. A winter, with no spring, at the end of it. She let it land. She had always known how to let a thing land. I have prayed to be wrong, child. I have prayed until my knees bled. The bones do not lie. The yard made a sound then. Low, animal, 400 wolves deciding at once to be afraid. They're your children too, Orla said. And now she did look only at Emmerich, as though she could haul his eyes up to hers by force of wanting. Ours? You put your hand on my belly 100 nights, and you called them don't. It cracked out of him. For one instant, something real moved behind his face, something drowning. Then it was gone, packed away under the flat certainty a pack needs from its alpha. You'll go by moonset, beyond the marker stones, you, and what you carry, and if I don't, then it stops being an exile. He said it very quietly, and the quiet was the cruelest part, because a shout she could have forgiven. Don't make me give that order, Orla, please. Just go. She stood there in the ring of torches and waited for the ground to open, and it didn't. She waited for one voice, in 400, to say this is madness. She has stood watch over your children while you slept, and not one voice came. Even the bond, the silver thread that had run warm between her and Emmerich for 2 years. She reached for the way you reach for a rail in the dark and found him already sawing through it from his side. She felt it part felt, the exact moment her own mate cut himself loose from her, and it was worse than any blade she had taken. And she had taken several. So she did the only thing a tracker can when the world stops making sense. She stopped begging it to. Orla pulled her hood up over 3 heartbeats and 1 broken one, turned her back on every face she had ever bled for, and walked out through the marker stones into the long dark alone. She did not cry until the torches were well behind her, and then she cried, the way you would bleed from a deep wound, steadily, without drama, without any way to stop it. Her feet went from aching to nothing, which she knew was the dangerous part, and she counted her own steps to keep from lying down. Somewhere past the 3rd ridge her legs simply stopped taking orders, and she went down into a drift, and the last clear thought she had was for the 3 small lives she was about to take down with her, who had done nothing, who had chosen nothing, who had not even been born. And then, because the world is not done with you until it is done with you, she felt eyes, not the pack's. Behind her upslope, where the black tree line met the black sky, something stood watching her die, big. Patient in the way only a predator is patient. Yellow eyes catching a torch memory that wasn't there, fixed on her, unblinking, and coming, now, at last, down the slope toward her through the snow. Orla's wolf lifted its head one final time to snarl at it. Then the dark took her, and she never saw whether the thing on the ridge had come to save her or to finish what her mate had started. Orla woke to the conviction that she had died, and that the gods, in their humor, had made the afterlife smell of wood smoke and crushed pine. She was warm. That was the first wrong thing. She had been so certain the cold would be the last thing she ever felt. That, being warm, seemed a cruelty. She lay still and took an inventory the way she had been taught, toes and fingers screaming with the pins and needles of blood coming home, a weight of furs, a low fire ticking to her right. And under her ribs, when she dared reach for it, 3 heartbeats, fast and small. And there, she had not killed them. Not yet. The relief was so violent, it nearly put her back under. "You'll want water before you want to sit up," said a voice from the dark corner of the room, a woman's voice, dry and old and entirely unbothered. "But you'll try to sit up first, because your sort always does. Go on then. Get it over with." Orla opened her eyes to a low timber room, a slanted ceiling of black beams, and a small ancient woman perched on a stool with a mortar in her lap, grinding something that smelled of tallow and bitter root. Not Verith. She knew every healer's den in Verith, and this was none of them. The furs were frost-tipped, the wrong wolves. The carvings over the doorway were the wrong gods. "Where?" Orla started, and her voice came out of ruin. "Dunmar," the old woman said, and watched what that did to her face. I see you know the name. Drink. Dunmar." Orla's whole body went cold in a way the snow had never managed. Every child in Verith was raised on Dunmar, the way you are raised on the dark under the bed, the pack across the sable, the frost wolves, the ones the elders spat after naming, and the winter wolf who led them. A name Emmerich only ever said, with his jaw tight. She had crawled out of one pack that wanted her children dead and been carried into the den of its oldest enemy. "The one who found me," Orla rasped, "on the ridge." "Who?" "That," said the old woman, "is a question you'll put to him, not to me. I'm Selah. I keep folk breathing. That's the whole of my office. Politics I leave to fools with better knees." She set the mortar aside and came to the bedside, brisk as one who has delivered half a pack and buried the other half. Her fingers found Orla's wrist, her belly, the pulse at her throat, brisk and clinical. Whatever she found there made the seams of her old face pull tight. "How many nights since you slept, warm and ate proper?" "I don't." Orla tried to count, and couldn't. Some. Someone's cut it, and cut it badly, from the far side. "I can smell the rot of it on you." She said it plainly, the way you'd note a broken bone. "That's a sickness, girl." Whatever the poets pretend, a rejected mate doesn't just grieve. She fails. Body forgets to want things. And you've three in you needing you to want to live very hard indeed. Orla turned her face to the fire, so the old woman wouldn't see it land. Because that was the thing no one warned you about. It wasn't the cold that had nearly killed her out there. It was the silence where Emmerich used to be. The severed end of the thread still hanging inside her, weeping like a cut root, telling her body over and over, in a language older than words, that she had been found wanting and cast off, and that there was no reason left to keep her heart at its work. She had walked into that snow, half wanting to lie down. She knew it now, in the warm, and was ashamed of it. "I want to live," she said. It came out flat. "I don't much care about myself just now, but I want them to live. Tell me what to do, and I'll do it." Selah studied her a long moment, and something in the old woman's face unbent by a hair. "That," she said, "is the right answer, and the first sensible thing you've said. Eat, sleep, let the thaw come slow." She turned for the door. "And when he comes, and he'll come, he's been 3 times already while you slept. Don't you dare die out of spite, just to make a liar of me." She was gone before Orla could ask what he had wanted, standing over her, 3 times in the dark. Orla meant to lie still and gather herself. She managed perhaps an hour. She was cataloguing the room, out of old habit, one door, a shuttered window, a blade she could reach, on the drying rack if it came to it, when the first pain took her. It was low and deep and wrong, and she knew it, for what it was, the way she knew north. Too early, 2 months, too early. The cold, the failing, the severed bond. Some door in her body had been jarred loose and would not be argued shut again. The pain crested and let go, and she lay there gasping and bargaining with gods she had stopped believing in years ago. "No," she told her own belly, furious, terrified. "No, not yet. You hold on, you hold." The second pain folded her in half. She heard herself make a sound she had never made in her life. Not under any blade. She groped for the edge of the bed, for the door, for anyone, and got her feet to the cold floor through sheer stubbornness and no sense at all. The door opened. He filled it. The way weather fills a valley. She had a confused impression of gray cloak, gray eyes, a stillness that made the small room smaller, and of sighs, and of a scent that hit her wolf sideways and made it lift its head when it had no business lifting anything. He took in the room in a single sweep, the blood-pale sweat on her, the way she was gripping the bed frame, the low animal set of her body. "Selah," the winter wolf said, not loudly. And yet she would have wagered every wolf in Dunmar heard it. His eyes never left Orla. Now, it's coming now. And the last thing Orla thought, before the next pain took the room and everything in it, was that she was about to bring 3 children, the whole world wanted dead, into the hands of a man she had been taught since birth to fear. They came in the deep of the night, all 3, in the order Orla would carry to her grave. A girl first, small and furious, and already howling. Then a boy, quiet, watchful, his eyes opened too soon and too dark. Then the last boy, smallest of the 3, who came so still that for one endless breath the room forgot how to work, until Selah turned him and struck the soles of his feet, and he shuddered and screamed, and Orla started breathing again on a sob. It should not have gone well, 2 months early. A mother half-starved and bonsick. 3 where there should have been 1. That it did, Orla credited to the old woman's hands and to the man who never once left the doorway, holding it against the whole world, saying nothing, his gray eyes moving from her face to the fire to the door with a soldier's patience. And then it was done, and there were 3, and they were alive. Selah wrapped them and laid them along Orla's body, and Orla looked down at 3 small, crumpled faces, and felt her ruined heart lurch back into dangerous service. This, then. This was the thing worth wanting. She had them. She would keep them if she had to open her own veins to do it. That was when the trouble started. The girl found her voice again first, and then the others. And within moments all three were screaming, not the ordinary outrage of the newborn, but something higher and more frantic, a distress that put every hair on Orla's arms on end. She did what mothers do. She gathered them close, gave them her scent, her warmth, the heartbeat they had known from the inside for 7 months. They did not settle. If anything, they wailed harder, their wolves already awake under new skin and thrashing at something no one else could see. "They're early," Orla said, hearing the panic climb her own voice. "That's all. They're early. They don't." Sela had gone very still, watching. "That's not early. Early's tired. That's a pup that can't find its ground." She frowned. "A newborn quiets to its sire's scent, written in before they've eyes to see. It's the first knot the world ties for them. This is mine. This one keeps me. Give them the father girl and they'll ease." And there it was, the whole horror of Orla's life laid out in one sentence. The father was 2 ridges and a river away, and he had cut them loose, along with her. She didn't have him. But she had, God's help her, the one thing she had carried out of Verith, without meaning to. Knotted into the hem of her cloak, because she was a sentimental fool who had meant to burn it and hadn't, was a strip of leather Emmerich had worn at his wrist for 2 years. It carried his scent, still faint under smoke and snow. Emmerich's scent. Their sires. "Here," she said, tearing it free with shaking fingers. "Here. This is him. This is your father. This." She pressed it to the girl's face. The child screamed as though she had been burned. All 3 did. They recoiled from the leather, from their own blood, their small bodies arching away in a rejection so absolute that Sela stepped back and made a warding sign over her chest. Orla stared at the strip in her hand, as if it had turned to a serpent, not confused by his scent, not indifferent to it. They knew it in the bone, the way they were built to, and they refused it. They spat their own father out. "That's not." Sela's voice had lost its dryness entirely. "Girl, that doesn't happen. That can't." The smallest boy had gone from screaming to something worse. A thin, failing wail with no strength behind it, the sound of a candle guttering, and Orla felt the floor drop out of the whole world because she had heard that exact sound come out of him once already tonight, in the moment he had nearly not come at all. "He's failing," she said. "Sela, he's do something. Someone do something." And the winter wolf crossed the room. He hadn't said a word in an hour. He came now without asking leave, went to one knee at the bedside, and held out his scarred hands, not to Orla, but to the child. It was the most natural thing in the world, and the strangest thing Orla had ever seen. She should have snarled. Every law of her body said, "Guard them. This is the enemy. This is the wolf your alpha hated." Instead, she watched, frozen, as Soren of Dunmar gathered up her dying son against his chest, as though he had done it 1,000 times. The boy went silent. Not the silence of the guttering candle, the other kind. The whole body ease of a creature that has, against all odds, found its ground. The small, frantic wolf under the new skin lay down, his fists uncurled. He turned his blind face into the gray wool over Soren's heart and breathed. One long, shuddering breath, and then another, deeper, and slept. The room was so quiet, Orla could hear the fire. Then the girl stopped screaming. She had turned her head toward Soren across the bed, blind eyes questing, and gone abruptly, pointedly calm. A heartbeat later, the second boy did the same. 3 newborns who had spat out their own father's scent lay in a warm, quiet row, every one of them oriented toward the same gray stranger, the same still point, as surely as 3 needles, swinging north. Sela lowered herself onto her stool, as if her legs had stopped trusting her. "In 60 years, she whispered. "I have never. They've chosen. They've gone and chosen the way a pup chooses its sire. Only, she looked at Soren, and there was something close to fear in it. Only he isn't. He isn't anything to them. He isn't kin. He isn't bonded. He isn't, I know what I'm not, Soren said quietly. It was the first thing he had said since the children came. And his voice had gone, strange, rough at the edges, like a man who has picked up something he was not prepared to be handed. He was looking down at the sleeping boy against his chest, with an expression Orla could not read at all and would spend a long time trying to. Believe me, I know exactly what I'm not. He lifted his gray eyes to Orla's, over the heads of her sleeping children. But they've decided otherwise, he said. And in my experience, the young ones are never wrong about a man. Which leaves us both with a great deal to work out, you and I, starting with why 3 newborns of Verith blood would sooner die than answer to the very sire who made them. She named them on the 3rd day, when it became clear all 3 meant to stay. The girl she called Nell, short and hard to break, like the child herself, who had come out swinging at a world that had tried to end her before she drew breath. The watchful boy she called Evo, after the U they cut the watchbows from, because he had come into the world already standing sentry at its gate. And the smallest, the one who had nearly slipped away and hadn't, she called Tam, the littlest name she knew, for the littlest of them, who had already proved that the smallest thing in a room can be the one that flatly refuses to die. Nell woke before trouble did. Twice in that first week the whole household learned it. The girl would stiffen in her cradle and loose a thin warning cry a full minute before the eaves cracked in the frost, or a hound got loose in the yard. Eva watched. He watched everyone, with those 2 dark eyes, and he had a particular stillness he saved for certain faces. A flat, unblinking attention that made grown wolves shift their weight and find reasons to leave the room. And Tam, who should by rights have been the frailest, turned out to be the one who mended things, set him in the arms of a Dunmar scout who had lost his brother that winter, and the man came away with wet eyes and no idea why. It was Evo's gift that unsettled the household most, because it was the one that looked back. One gray afternoon a young Dunmar wolf named Orin, who kept the tally on the meal store, came to see the famous Triplets, and Evo fixed him with that dark, patient, unblinking stare, and would not let it go. Orin went the color of tallow, shifted his weight, shifted it again, and within a held breath was stammering to Sela about a half sack of meal he had been carrying home each week, and always meaning to set right. No one had accused him of anything. A 4-day-old child had looked at him, and the truth had come up out of the man like water finding a crack. They're not cursed, Orla told Sela fiercely, on a night when the old woman had gone quiet over the cradles. Whatever Morwen's bones said, look at them. That's not doom, that's just more. 3 of them, so 3 times as much. I never said cursed, Sela said mildly. I said strange. There's a wide country between the 2 girl, and most fools never learn to walk it. She was quiet a moment, her thumb smoothing the down of Tam's head. But here is a thing I've said to no one. A gift like the dark boy's a child the truth runs toward, is not a thing the powerful enjoy having under their roof. You had best pray no one in Verith ever understood what they were truly trying to drown. The one who could not be argued out of the room was the winter wolf himself. Soren came every day. He came under the excuse of the smallest boy at first. Tam slept best against his chest, and no one could pretend otherwise, so the Alpha of Dunmar spent a portion of each evening sitting by a fire with a Verith infant asleep over his heart, looking faintly like a man holding a live coal he had been told not to drop. But the excuse wore thin, because he came when Tam slept fine too. He came and sat and asked Orla questions. That was the part she couldn't file anywhere. He asked about Verith. Not gloating. Not fishing for weakness the way an enemy alpha should. Or not only that, he asked how the storehouses were kept and who kept the tallies. And once very carefully, he asked how long the moon speaker had been reading bones for the alpha, and whether Emmerich had ever once decided anything without her at his shoulder. Why does the winter wolf care how Verith counts its grain? Orla asked him flatly. Because a pack that starts starving, Soren said, starts raiding. And I have buried 9 of mine this past year to Verith's steel, on ground that used to be quiet. He turned Tam gently against his shoulder. Your old Alpha's house is rotting from somewhere, Orla. I have smelled it across the sable for 2 winters. I would like to know from where, before it finishes rotting, and the rot comes for mine. It was a good answer, and that was what unsettled her. His answers were always reasonable, always one clean step short of the whole truth. She was a tracker. She knew the shape of a trail, with one print carefully swept away. His beta had no such patience with any of it. Rurik was a broad, scarred wolf, with a grievance he wore openly, and he cornered Soren in the yard where he plainly thought Orla could not hear. Verith whelps, Rurik said, low and furious. Under our own roof. If it gets across the sable that we are keeping his get, Soren, that is not a scandal. That is a reason. That is the excuse he has wanted for 20 years. You are handing the man a war and rocking it to sleep by the fire. He threw them in the snow, Soren said, and that is his shame to carry, not our throats to bear for it. Rurik's voice dropped further. Send them on her too, before someone decides for us. There was a silence. Orla, frozen against the inner wall with her heart in her mouth, waited to hear the winter wolf agree because everything sensible in the world was on Rurik's side of it. No, Soren said. And that was all. No reason, no argument. Just the flat refusal of a man who had decided something in a birthing room days ago and did not intend to explain it. They stay. She stays. See to the river watch, Rurik, and leave the children to me. Orla went back to the cradles with her mind turning over and over. He had a reason. Men like that always had a reason, and he was keeping it under a swept print where she could not read it, and until she could, she would not let herself lean an inch toward the warmth of him, no matter how her children swung north to his voice. She held to that resolve through supper, and while she nursed the boys, and sang Nell down, and right up until the deep of the night, when a floorboard she knew for a fact did not creak on its own, let out one small, careful sound in the dark of the nursery, and Orla woke, with the tracker's whole body already listening. Before she was even fully upright, that there was a stranger standing over her children's cradles, and that the shape of him against the banked fire had one arm raised and something long and thin and metal in his hand. Orla did not think. Thinking was a thing you did before and after. In the middle, there was only the body, and hers had been trained since she was 13 for exactly this. She came off the pallet low and fast, and took the intruder at the knees before the blade could finish its fall. They went down together into the cradle stand, and the world became elbows and snarling, and the hot copper smell of her own fear. He was bigger than her, and stronger, and he had a knife. And none of it mattered, because he had made the one unforgivable mistake of choosing the night a mother slept between her children and the door. She got a hand on his wrist and wrenched it hard, the wrong way, until the knife dropped, and then she had him pinned, her whole weight and grief and terror bearing down, when Nell woke the household with a scream that could have curdled the river. The door came off its latch. Soren filled the frame with a lamp in one hand and murder in his face. Rurik a half step behind him with steel already out. Alive, Orla gasped, because she was still a tracker, and a dead man tells you nothing. I want him alive. Get him off me before I forget I said that. They hauled the intruder up. He was Dunmar cloaked, but he was not Dunmar. The wolf under the man's skin had the wrong scent entirely. Road-worn and for hire, a knife for coin. Someone had paid well to see 3 newborns dead in their cradles, well enough that the man had crossed a river and a rival's wards to do it. The children were unhurt. Orla checked them with hands that would not stop shaking. Nell furious, Ivo silent and staring at the captive, with that flat, dark attention, Tam already fretting toward calm. Whole, all three whole. She pressed her face to the crown of Tam's small head and breathed until she could see straight. When she looked up, Soren was watching her over the captive's slumped head, and the look on his face was not the look of an enemy alpha counting his advantages. It was something rawer and more frightening than that, and he wiped it away the moment he saw her see it. They questioned the man in the low room off the yard. He gave them little, a road name, a purse of coin he swore he had taken from a hooded broker who dealt only in the dark. He did not know who had bought the knife. Men like him never did. But when Rurik emptied the purse onto the table to count it, something small and hard rolled out among the coins and spun and settled, and Orla, leaning in out of habit, went cold to the soles of her feet. It was a token, a disc of pale bone no bigger than a thumbnail, its face worn with a symbol she had known her entire life, a crescent moon cradling a single carved eye, the mark of the moon speaker, Morwen's mark, the seal she pressed into the wax of every blessing, every reading, every death rite in Verith. Orla had worn a smaller version of it on a cord, at her own throat, from the age of 11 until the night she was cast out, because the woman who bore that mark had been the only mother she had ever had. That is a paymaster's token, Rurik said slowly, not understanding what he was looking at. A broker's mark. Whoever hired him wanted him able to prove which house was good for the coin. He turned it in the lamplight. Anyone know the sigil? Orla opened her mouth. Across the table, Soren of Dunmar had gone very, very still. The stillness she was coming to know meant he had seen the whole of a thing at once, and was deciding how much of it to let anyone see. His gray eyes flicked up and caught hers, and in them she read, plain as a swept print. He knew that mark. He knew it, and he had known it before it rolled onto the table, and he was not going to say so. No, Soren said. Burn it. Send the man south under guard, and let the road have him back. He closed his scarred hand over the little bone disc, and it vanished. Orla. A word. Outside, the yard was blue with pre-dawn and bitterly cold. He stood with his back to her for a moment, looking at the black line of the tree line, where she realized with a lurch he must have stood watching her die 3 weeks ago. You knew that mark, she said. Don't you dare tell me you didn't. I watched your face. I know a great many marks. He turned. In the half-light, the tiredness on him was plain, and something else under it, a guilt that did not fit an enemy. Orla, hear the shape of a thing, even if I can't yet give you the whole of it. Those children were not thrown out of Verith over a bad reading of bones. Someone with a great deal to lose needs them dead, needed them dead before they were even born, and reached across a river and my own wards to try again tonight. That is not superstition. That is a plan, and plans have authors. Then give me the name. Her voice cracked on it. You have it. I can see that you have it. Whose mark is on that token? For a long moment she thought he would tell her. She saw him weigh it, saw for one instant the man behind the swept prints look out at her and want to. Not yet, he said instead gently, and it was the gentleness that frightened her most, because he said it the way you say a thing to someone you don't want to break, because you won't believe me. Not from my mouth. You would sooner believe I was lying to turn you against Verith, and by the gods you would be half right to wonder. So I am going to get you proof, instead. Proof so plain that not a wolf on either bank of the Sable could call it a lie. And until I have it, I need you to trust me. Just a little. Just enough. And Orla stood in the freezing yard, with her children asleep behind her, and her whole life a smoking ruin behind that, and understood that the winter wolf was asking her to hand him the last thing she had left to trust with, on nothing but his word, and that the worst part, the very worst part, was how badly some tired traitor corner of her wanted to. Winter softened toward its long gray end, and Orla gave the winter wolf her trust, the way you cross thin ice, a little weight at a time. ready to throw yourself back at the first crack. The trouble was that the ice held. She watched him for a month, the way she would watch a suspect, and what she caught him at, over and over, was decency. She caught him once, standing over the 3 cradles in the gray before dawn with a look on his face like a man doing sums that kept coming out to a number he could not afford, and when Nell woke and reached for him, he had picked her up with a tenderness that had no audience to perform for, and therefore no reason to be false. And she caught herself, the worst discovery, listening for his step in the yard, saving up small things Evo had done to tell him at supper. And one cold night on the east wall, forgetting entirely to be suspicious of the way his shoulder nearly touched hers, and having to reach for the suspicion later like a coat she had set down and lost. The mate bond was the cruelty in all of it. The old one had finally mercifully begun to wither and go numb, the way Sela had promised it would. It was the new thing she could not name that frightened her, a warmth that woke when he entered a room and banked low when he left it, that she told herself was gratitude and knew, with a tracker's honesty, was nothing of the kind. She had thought that door in her was nailed shut for good. She had not counted on a gray wolf leaning his patient weight against it, week after week, asking nothing, until the nails began to give. She was still lying to herself about all of it, when the horn sounded from the river watch, and a Dunmar scout came in hard across the yard shouting the words that stopped Orla's heart in her chest. Verith. Verith at the ford under a parley banner. It is the Alpha himself, Soren, it is Emmerich, and he is asking for her by name. Emmerich came alone to the middle of the ford, as the parley custom demanded, and Orla went out to meet him alone, because she would not be a thing men discussed across a river as though she could not speak. He looked terrible, the thing she hated herself for noticing. The gray had spread at his temples, there were new hollows under his eyes, and he had the gaunt, sleepless look of a man being eaten from the inside. He stood in the shallows, with the cold water breaking around his boots, and stared at her as though she were a ghost he had prayed for, and dreaded in equal measure. They live, he said. His voice broke on it. The children. I heard 3, I heard they live, you heard right. She kept her voice flat. A wall. No thanks to you, Orla. He took a step and the water splashed and she saw him check himself, hold himself back by main force. I have not slept a whole night since. I dream of the snow. I dream of you in the snow, and I wake reaching for a bond that isn't that I. He dragged a hand down his ruined face. Bring them back. You, and them both. I will stand before the whole pack and name the reading false. I will. You'll. What? And now the wall cracked, and something molten came up through it. You will unthrow us into the dark. You will uncut the bond. Emmerich? I felt you do it. I felt you saw yourself loose from me while your own children were still under my heart, and you did it in front of 400 people who had known me my whole life, and not one of them, not one. She stopped, because her voice had gone somewhere she could not control, and she would not weep in this river in front of this man. Behind her, up the bank, Sela had come out, with the children bundled against the cold, meaning kindness, meaning to let a father at least see. And Orla watched Emmerich's face as he saw his son and his daughter for the first time, and she watched all 3 children turn toward him across 40 feet of cold air, and she watched them recoil. Nell snarled, a newborn snarl, absurd and tiny, and utterly serious. Evo fixed the Alpha of Verith with that flat, unblinking stare, the one he saved for a certain kind of face. And Tam, the mender who calmed everything he touched, began to cry and could not be calmed, turning his face into Sala's shoulder as though the sight of the man hurt him. Emmerich made a sound Orla had never heard a wolf make. They know, he whispered. He was staring at his children as though they were passing sentence, and perhaps they were. Gods. They know what He looked up at her, and his eyes were wild now, and wet, and there was something in them she had never expected to see there. Not guilt only, but fear, and under the fear, a terrible warning. Orla, listen to me. We have very little time, and you must hear this. If you never hear another word from me, it was not the bones. Do you understand? I need you to understand what I am telling you, and what I cannot. His head came up sharply, like a man who has heard a floorboard creak behind him. You do not know what she made me do, he breathed. You do not know what she is. And if I say her name aloud on open ground, I am a dead man before I reach my own gate, and so are they. So I am begging you. The Verith escort horn sounded twice from the far bank, sharp, a summons and a leash. And Emeric flinched like a whipped hound, cast one last drowning look at the three children who would not have him and the woman he had thrown away, turned and waded back across the river to whatever was waiting to punish him for coming, leaving Orla standing in the shallows with half a truth in her hands and no idea at all which of the two alphas in her life she should be more afraid of. The storm came down out of the north 3 nights later, the last hard blow of the dying winter, and drove the whole household into the great room around the fire. By deep night, the children were down at last in the big cradle by the hearth. Sela had gone to her bed, Rurik had the watch, and Orla found herself alone with the winter wolf and the storm and a silence that had stopped being comfortable hours ago and become something charged that neither would be the one to name. Ask me, Soren said finally into the fire. Whatever it is you've been not asking all night. You've that look. The one you think I can't read. He turned from the fire, and the stormlight and hearthlight were on his gray face, and there was no swept print in it just then, only a man, tired and unguarded, looking at her as though she were the one true thing in a house full of shadows. Go on, say the part you've spent all night deciding I won't want to hear. She meant to ask about the token. She meant to ask about Emeric, about the reading, about the swept prints, and the reasons he would not give. What came out instead, in a voice she barely recognized, was the truest thing in her. Why did you come down the ridge? She said that night. You could have let the snow do your enemy's work. 3 Verith heirs, and the mate he'd cast off. Gone by morning, no blood on your hands, and your oldest rival's line ended for free. Any alpha in the world would have called that a gift from the gods and gone home to bed. Why did you come down for me? For a long moment the fire was the only sound. Because I stood on that ridge, Soren said slowly, and I watched 400 wolves turn their backs on a woman carrying 3 lives, and not one of them lifted a hand. And I have spent my whole life being told what I am. The frost wolf, the cold one, the wolf your children should fear. And I found that I could be that. I could be the thing they all say I am. He held her eyes. Right up until the moment it would have cost me you, and then it turned out I couldn't, after all. Orla stopped breathing. I've no right to any of it, he went on, lower. You're a rejected mate with a raw wound where your trust used to be. And I'm a man keeping things from you, and I know how that sits, and I have hated every hour of it. So tell me to sit back down and mind my own hearth, and I'll do it and never say another word. His voice dropped to almost nothing under the storm. Or ask me to cross the room. The fire cracked. The wind hauled at the shutters. Somewhere very far off under her ribs, the door she had nailed shut swung open on its own. Cross the room, Orla said. He crossed the room. And when he kissed her, it was careful at first, as though she might bolt, and then not careful at all, and the last of her caution went out of her like a snuffed lamp. There was no one to perform for, no pack and no prophecy, only the storm at the shutters, and the low red fire and the steady certainty of him, at last, warm against the cold she had carried so long. And then the bond woke. She felt it kindle the way you feel the sun come out from behind a cloud, a warmth that poured in through every place they touched, and that was not hers. She could feel him. His relief first, rolling off him in a wave, and under it a tenderness so fierce it stopped her heart, and under that a grief, and under that, for one flashing instant, before he could shudder it, a room. a locked room in the center of him, cold and guarded, where something lived that he had let no one near. Not even now, not even in this. She was in no state to make sense of it just then. She filed it away the way a tracker files a wrong print in a true trail, and let the moment close over the question. They sat a long while by the dying fire, with the storm gentling at last outside, saying little, and for one stolen hour she let herself be a woman someone had wanted, for no reason but wanting. Not for her blade, not for her belly, not for a bloodline or a use. Only wanted. She had never once had that in her whole life, and she understood, in the quiet circle of his arm, why fools threw everything away for it. This wasn't a scheme, she said. She had not meant to say it aloud. No, Soren said low, and she felt the truth of it come warm down the new bond. God's help me. Whatever this started as, Orla, this part was never a scheme. Whatever this started as, she almost let it go. She was warm and tired, and unwilling to break the one good hour she had had in a year. But she was what she was, and the 4 small words would not pull free, and she lay very still against his heartbeat and let her tracker's mind, which never truly slept, turn them over. Later, when the fire had burned to coals, and Soren slept the way she had never once seen him sleep, wholly and defenselessly, Orla rose to bank the embers so the children would not wake cold. And it was there, kneeling at the hearth, that she saw it. The corner of a folded letter that had slipped from his cloak where it hung, catching the coal light. She would tell herself forever after that she had not meant to look, but she was a tracker. And the wax seal holding the letter closed had been pressed unmistakably with the crest of Werewolf, Emmerich's own crest, the mountain and the running wolf, and beneath it, in a hand she did not know, ran a single line of direction that turned the warm hour to ash in her chest before she had even finished reading it. She and the 3 must not be returned. Keep them exactly where they are, and keep her believing it was her own choice. Soren of Dunmar always had the answer before you had finished the question. The most alarming thing about him, and lately the most comforting, that sense of a man who had already thought 3 steps past wherever you stood. He had no answer ready when Orla woke him with the letter in her fist. "Read it to me," she said. Her voice had gone to the flat, terrible calm she used on captured men. She had checked the children, asleep, safe, breathing, and she had dressed, because whatever happened next, she meant to face it on her own 2 feet. "Read it aloud, Soren. I want to hear your voice say the words." He came up out of sleep and saw the seal, and she watched the whole of it hit him, watched him understand, in a single gray-eyed instant, exactly which letter she was holding and exactly how it read to a woman who had been thrown away once already. And he did the thing that undid him. He did not reach for the answer. He paused. "Orla," he said carefully, "that is not what it... Don't." The word came out of her like a blade. "Do not tell me it isn't what it looks like." That is the sentence a man reaches for, when it is precisely what it looks like, and he only needs a moment to find something better. She unfolded the letter with hands that would not shake, because she would not let them. She and the 3 must not be returned. Keep them exactly where they are, and keep her believing it was her own choice. She looked up. "So I'll ask plainly, the way I asked, at the river. And God's help you, Soren. Give me a plain answer. Was any of it my choice? Did I crawl to Dunmar? Or was I herded here? Did your wolves find me on that ridge by chance? Or were they told exactly which ridge to watch?" The silence went on a beat too long, and in it she felt, down the new bond she had been so warm in an hour ago, his dread and his scramble, the weighing of a man deciding how much of a terrible truth he can afford to hand over. The same shape she had felt off Emmerich in the moot yard, and it nearly took her legs from under her. "I knew you'd be cast out before you did," Soren said, finally, quietly, like a man laying down a weapon. "For 2 years, I have had word from inside Werewolf that the Moonspeaker meant to move against Emmerich's heirs the moment they were born, and that he was too far under her hand to stop it. When the reading came, my wolves were on that ridge because I put them there. I could not walk into Verith and save you. I would have started the very war she wanted. So I made certain that when they threw you out, you would be thrown toward me. The room tilted. Orla put a hand on the cold mantle. So, it's true. Her voice did not sound like her own. The whole of it. The birthing room, the questions by the fire, the wall, tonight, all of it managed. You needed Emmerich's heirs kept out of his reach, and a mate to raise them quiet where you could watch, and a cast-out woman with nowhere left to run made it simple. The words came from somewhere very old in her, a wound that had healed crooked long before Soren ever stood on a ridge. Tell me I'm wrong, Soren. Say the words. Tell me I'm wrong. He looked at her for a long moment. She watched him try to find a way to say it that was not the truth, and fail, because he was curse him, an honest man in the one way that mattered and none of the ways that would have saved this. You're not wrong about how it began, he said, and there it was. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes until she saw stars. Because it was that or make a sound she would never take back. She had done it again, the one thing she had sworn on that frozen ridge she never would. She had let a gray wolf lean on the nailed-shut door until it gave, and the whole warm time there had been a plan under it, with her name written in the margin, keep her believing it was her own choice. She had not even been given the dignity of being lied to. Well, she had been given the meaner gift of being allowed to lie to herself, and thank him for it. Not all of it, Soren said, and he was on his feet now, and there was a desperation in his voice she had never heard. The swept prints all gone, the guarded room thrown open too late. Orla. It began as a plan to keep 3 children alive. It stopped being that so long ago, I can't even. When? She dropped her hands, her face was wet, and she did not care. When did it stop? Name me the night, Soren. Point to the hour on this arrangement, where it turned from managing me into meaning it, because from in here it all looks the same, it all looks exactly the same. A man being kind to a woman, he needs to keep still. He had no answer for that either. He stood there, with his honest, ruined face, and no answer, because there is no answer to that. There never has been, and they both knew it. I trusted you, she said, and her voice finally broke all the way through. Do you know what that cost me? I had one trust left in the whole world after your river took the rest, and I gave it to you a coin. At a time, so carefully, and you knew what it was worth, because you knew what it had cost me, and you spent it, anyway. Orla, no. She was at the cradle now, gathering her children, and her hands were sure, even though nothing else in her was. Nell wakes before trouble. I should have listened to my own daughter. She carried the 3 of them out of the great room into the cold gray morning, past a frozen Sela in the doorway and a Rurik who took one look at her face and stood aside, and Soren's voice followed her out into the yard. Orla, please, there's more. You have to let me. Because turning around was the one thing she knew she could not survive. She got as far as the gate before she understood she had nowhere on the whole earth to take them. Cast out of one pack, fleeing another, 3 infants and a bond-sick mother, and a winter not quite done killing. And that was where the woman with the kind winter face was waiting for her. Just outside the gate, alone, her spotted hands folded and her pale eyes full of grief, exactly as though she had known which morning to come. Oh, my girl, said Morwen the moon speaker softly. What have they done to you? Come away from this place. I have come to take you home. For one whole breath, standing at the gate of Dunmar with her heart in pieces and her children in her arms, Orla nearly walked into those spotted old hands and let them take her home. Because that was the wound Morwen had always known exactly how to press. The oldest one, the 11-year-old in the kennels, who had been no one until one woman looked at her and saw something worth teaching. Everything Orla trusted about her own 2 eyes, she had learned at this woman's knee. And here was the knee, and the grief-carved face, and the open arms. Come home, come away. On the one morning she had nowhere else in all the world to go. She took a step toward Morwen, and all three children began to scream, not the fretful screaming of the newborn, the other kind, the high, frantic, whole-body terror she had heard exactly once before, in a birthing room, when she had pressed their own father's scent against their faces, and they had recoiled as though from fire. But this was worse. This was that same rejection turned up past anything a small body should be able to make, Nell thrashing, Tam wailing himself gray, and Evo silent. Evo, who never screamed, staring over her shoulder at the moon speaker with his dark eyes stretched wide, and a thin, endless animal keen coming out of him that Orla felt in her back teeth. Orla went very still. She was a tracker, and a tracker, in the moment that matters, stops asking the world to be what she wants, and simply reads what is in front of her. Her children had rejected their own father, and she had wept over it as a curse. But it was not a curse. She saw that now, all at once. Tam mended what was wounded. Nell woke before what was coming. And Ivo went still and stared at a certain kind of face, a face with a lie living behind it. And he had turned that flat, dreadful stare on exactly two people in his short life, on Emmerich at the river. And now, harder than she had ever seen it, on the woman who had raised her. They could not be lied to. That was the gift. 3 children who could smell a false heart, the way she could read a false trail. And that was why they had to die before they could speak. Not because they would pull the pack down, because they would see straight through the person holding it up. The token, Orla heard herself say. Very quietly. The paymaster's token, the one on the man who came for their cradles in the dark. She lifted her eyes from her screaming children to the moon speaker's kind old face. It bore your mark, Morwen, the crescent and the eye. I have worn that mark at my own throat since I was a child. I would know it in the dark by touch. You hired the knife. The grief on Morwen's face did not so much fall away as simply switch off, like a lamp shuttered. And what was underneath was so calm and so cold and so entirely without love that Orla understood she had never once in her life seen this woman's real face until this exact moment. You always were the best I ever trained, Morwen said. Even her voice had changed, the warmth gone out of it, leaving something dry and precise. A mind like a blade. I did think more than once, what a waste to spend a blade like that. She tilted her head. But you understand, surely, I have kept Vareth whole for 30 years. 3 alphas counseled, every one a fool, who'd have run the pack onto the rocks without my hand on the wheel. I read them, the bones they need to hear. It is the only thing that has ever kept the ungrateful pack from tearing itself to pieces. Her pale gaze moved to the children, with no more feeling than a woman looking at a debt. And then you went and whelped 3 little truth-tellers who will grow up unable to be read a single useful bone. Do you see what you made me do? A thing like that cannot be allowed near power. Not near mine. Emmerich knew, Orla whispered. That's what he was trying to tell me at the river. You made him cast us out. You told him the same lie. You told the whole yard, and he was too far under your hand to Noxbia. Merrick does as he is counseled, Morwen said. Because I have counseled him since he was a boy, because I hold a great many of his secrets, and because he is at bottom a coward, as most powerful men are. He wept over you. He will weep again. It changes nothing. She smiled, and it was the most horrible thing Orla had ever seen precisely, because it was still, faintly, the smile she had loved. Now, give me the children, Orla. I did not come to this gate alone, and I did not come to argue. You have wronged Vareth gravely, a rejected mate who fled to the enemy and gave the Alpha's own heirs into the Winter Wolf's hands. That is the story the council will hear at the moot, in every particular true, and there is not a pack in the marches that will not vote to have those children put down as a danger to the peace once I have finished reading them the bones. I would so much rather you lived, child. but you will hand them to me, either way, from the shadow of the tree line, where an hour ago, Soren had watched her die and come down the ridge. Other shapes moved now. 6, 8, Verith wolves, Morwen's own, spread wide in the disciplined half-circle of people who have done this before. And Orla stood alone in the gateway between two packs, with 3 screaming children and no ally left. She had not just cursed and walked away from, and understood that the woman who had taught her to read the whole world had been the one true thing she had never once read right, and that she had perhaps a handful of heartbeats to decide whether the last thing she ever did would be worth the doing. The gate of Dunmar opened behind Orla, and the winter wolf came through it at a dead run. He did not go for her. That was the thing she would remember. He came out of that gate with Rurik and a dozen Dunmar wolves at his heels, and he put himself between the children and Morwen's spread half-circle, without breaking stride, without a word, without once trying to take them out of Orla's arms. And she understood, in the space of a heartbeat, the whole truth of a letter she had read wrong by firelight. A man keeping her as a pawn seizes the pawn. A man who had bled his own advantage to keep 3 children alive stands in front of them and dares the knife to come through him first. Moon speaker, Soren said, and his voice was winter itself. You are 8 wolves deep, on my ground, at my gate. Come for children under my roof. Give me one reason. I have wanted one for 2 years. She had not survived 30 years at the shoulder of power by fearing wolves at gates. You'll want a better reason than temper, winter, wolf, she said, before you spill council blood, because the council is what I've brought. She lifted one spotted hand toward the ford, and Orla's stomach dropped, because there, filing down to the water in the pale morning, banners and gray heads, and the assembled weight of the whole marches, came the alphas of the moot. Summoned, Orla realized, summoned days ago, to witness a handover and bless a judgment, all of it arranged before she had ever found a letter or burned a bridge. Bring the woman and her whelps to the ford, and we will do this in the light, before every pack in the land, exactly as the law demands. I have nothing to hide, she smiled her still cold smile. That has always been your trouble, child. You imagine the truth is on your side. The truth is only ever on the side of whoever is trusted to read it aloud. They gathered in the cold shallows, and on both banks, the council of alphas in a grave ring, come to watch a matter of doom settled. Emeric stood among the alphas with his gaunt, sleepless face, and would not look at Orla, and she thought she finally understood why, not shame only, but a leash. Morwen spoke first, as she always did, and told it beautifully, every word of it true. A reading of doom. 3 heirs of ill omen, a rejected mate who had fled into the arms of Verith's oldest enemy, and given the Alpha's own bloodline into the winter wolf's keeping. She asked the council, in a voice full of grief, to put 3 infants beyond ever bringing the prophecy to pass. And the gray heads of the moot began slowly to nod. Orla stepped into the center of the ring before she had decided to, the way she had stepped off the pallet at the assassin, on nothing but the body's certainty that this was the moment, or there would be no other. I was a tracker of Verith for 9 years, she said, and her voice carried because she made it. I never once read a trail wrong in the field. I read one thing wrong in my whole life, and she is standing there in a grief she does not feel, and I am done reading. Her wrong, she turned to the council. She says the truth belongs to whoever reads it aloud. So let us read some, together. A man came in the night, for my children in their cradles. A knife for coin, carrying a token, marked with the moon speaker's own seal. The winter wolf sent him south under guard, rather than let the road swallow him. She did not look at Soren, she trusted him now, wholly and too late, and just in time. Bring him, they brought him. Rurik had ridden through the night for it, and the man was hauled dripping into the ring, and before the whole moot, he named the broker's mark, the crescent and the eye, and the color, drained from a dozen gray faces that knew it. That proves a token, Morwen said, unruffled. Not a hand any enemy might forge my seal. The winter wolf, for one, who has schemed with this woman from the start. The winter wolf schemed with me, said Emmerich. The whole ford went silent. Emmerich stepped out from among the alphas, shaking, and did it anyway. The letter that damns him, it was mine. I wrote it. His voice gathered as he went, the way a landslide gathers. After I threw my mate in the snow on a reading, I was told to believe I could not undo it, so I did the one thing my cowardice allowed. I sent word across the river, to the one wolf strong enough to shelter them where the moon speaker's knives could not reach, and begged him to keep Orla from knowing. So her grief would ring true to the eyes. Morwen keeps in my hall, his ruined face was wet. Every reading of doom this pack has swallowed for 30 years came out of that woman's mouth. There was never a curse on those children, only a curse on her power, and its name is that they cannot be lied to. I have been afraid of her my whole life, and I am done being more afraid of her than ashamed before my own blood. He is broken with guilt, and grasping at absolution, Morwen said, and her voice had risen just a fraction, just enough for a tracker to hear. I read the bones true. Before the gods and this council, I swear it, I read the bones true. And Orla lifted her son. She carried Ivo out into the center of the ring, silent, watchful Ivo, with his two dark eyes, and she turned him to face the moon speaker, and she said to the assembled alphas of the whole marches, "This child cannot abide a lie told in his hearing. Ask her again. Look at him, all of you, and ask her again." "I read the bones," Morwen began. Ivo fixed her with the flat, dreadful, unblinking stare, the one he saved for exactly one kind of face, and he began to keen. That thin animal keening that ran up the spine and lodged in the back teeth, and he did not stop, and he did not look away. And one by one, the wolves of the moot felt the small hairs rise on their arms and understood in their own bodies, past all argument, what the child was telling them. Morwen's composure broke like river ice. "You ungrateful mongrel," and the mask was off now. 30 years of it, her face gone white and vicious, her hand darting into her sleeve and out with something bright, and her wolves surged in from the banks all at once. But this, the blade, the lunge, the closing distance, this was the one thing in the whole terrible morning that Orla knew in her bones how to do. She passed Ivo back into Soren's waiting arms without looking, because she knew they were there, and she turned into Morwen's rush the way she had turned into 100 rushes, caught the thin wrist and the bright blade above it, wrenched it wide, and used the moonspeaker's own fury to fold her down into the shallows. Her knee in the small of the old woman's back, the water breaking around them both. She leaned down close to the ear that had taught her everything she knew. "You taught me to read the whole world, Morwen," Orla said quietly. "Only for her. It never once crossed your mind that I would turn and read you." Then the council's wolves were there, and Vareth's turned as one against the woman who had ruled them by their fears. And it was after 30 years and one long winter, finally and completely done. They did not hang Morwen in the end, though the moot had the right of it. Emmerich asked for the older punishment instead, stripped of the moon and the mark, her name unmade and given to the far northern packs, a bondless, nameless thing, to live exactly as long as her own wits could keep her alive, where no reading of the bones would save her. It was, everyone agreed, crueler than a rope. Orla could not bring herself to mind. Spring came properly then, and the world got on with the business of not ending. The storehouses of Verith, honestly counted at last, turned out half empty in ways that had nothing to do with prophecy and everything to do with a woman who had needed a frightened pack to keep it biddable. The raids stopped, and 2 packs that had circled each other for 20 years found they had nothing left to fight about once the thing that wanted them fighting was gone. Orla was made Luna of Dunmar before the first thaw was off the ground, and she was good at it, and she had always known she would be. Emmerich came to the ford at midsummer. He came alone as custom demanded, and stood in the shallows where he had once waded back to his own leash. A different man than the one who had thrown her in the snow, not healed, but honest now, which was perhaps the more useful of the two. "I've come to say it plainly," he said, "since I've spent our whole lives saying everything the wrong way round. I would name you again, Orla, before the whole pack, as I unnamed you, every word reversed. I'd give the children back their line, and a father who would spend the rest of his days earning the word." His voice roughened. "I loved you. Under her hand and my own cowardice, that part was never false. Come home." And Orla stood in the water and waited to feel the old pull, the wound, the 11-year-old reaching, and felt, instead, only a great and quiet tenderness, the kind you feel for a place you used to live. "You did love me," she said. "I believe that now. And I forgive you, Emeric, not for your sake, though you may have it all the same, but because I have 3 children who will ask one day what became of the man who fathered them, and I would rather tell them he came to the ford and found his courage than that he never came at all." She shook her head slowly. "But I'm not coming home. That word does not point where it used to." She looked back over her shoulder, up the green bank, to where a gray wolf stood at a careful distance, with 3 children tumbling in the grass at his feet, not interfering, only there. "You want to give them back their father, Emeric. They already chose one. They chose him in a birthing room before they had opened their eyes, when he was the enemy, and you were the blood. And not one thing that has happened since has proved the choice wrong. I stopped arguing with my children about it a long time ago. You should too." Emeric followed her look up the bank to the winter wolf and the 3 small shapes in the grass, and something in his gaunt face broke and strangely eased, both at once. "They always were meant to be smarter than me," he said. And he bowed to her, the Alpha of Verith, to a woman he had once thrown to the snow, and waded back across the ford, to build something honest out of what was left. And this time, nothing waited on the far bank to punish him for coming. That was the easy grief, and it left her alone with the harder one she had been avoiding all season, because she had not opened the bond to Soren, not since the letter. She had let him court her, patiently, with no swept prince left in him, but she kept the new thread banked and shuttered, and told herself it was caution, and knew with a tracker's honesty it was fear. He had been kind to her with a plan underneath once, and she could not bear to hand him the last of her and find a plan under it again. So she held the door shut and watched him not push, and the whole household had to watch it too. "Talk to the man," Sela said, for perhaps the 100th time. "You have forgiven the coward who threw you in the snow, and you cannot forgive the fool who came down the ridge for you? He kept a thing from you to keep your babes breathing, and lost you for it. That is not a liar, girl. That is a man who paid your price and let you keep the change. You would know the difference if you were not so busy guarding a wound nobody is even reaching for." Orla did not answer. But that night, a hard out-of-season storm came down off the northern slopes, the kind of blow that should not come in summer, the ridge going white and blind, and somewhere in the small hours she woke, with a wrongness under her ribs, in the one place she had been trying not to feel anything at all. The bond. She had smothered it, but she had not cut it, and through the smothered dark of it came something faint and cold and drowning, sorrow and cold, and a slow drift she recognized, because she had felt it herself once, going down into a drift on a ridge while a stranger watched. She was dressed, and out the gate before she had finished deciding to be. She found him where she should have known she would, up on the ridge above the marker stones, the exact ground where he had once watched her die and come down to carry her home. He was on his knees in the white, with no cloak and no lantern. The gray wolf who always had the answer, keeping a private vigil with a storm. He plainly had no intention of surviving with any urgency. "You mad, cold, ridiculous man," Orla said, hauling him up out of the snow by his shirt, her heart slamming with a terror that had nothing to do with the cold. What in the name of every god do you think you're doing out here? Soren lifted his face to her, and it was open, wholly, finally. The guarded room thrown wide, nothing hidden. No swept print, no plan, no clever thing held back. Just a man, cold to the bone, looking at her the way she had once been looked at by 3 newborns who had found their ground. "I came down this ridge for you once," he said hoarse, the snow in his hair. "It's the truest thing I ever did, and I've spent every day since being paid back for the lie I wrapped it in. I don't want your forgiveness, Orla. I've no right to it. I only wanted to be in the one place where I got something right. On the night I lost you." His voice went. He tried again. "Ask me to earn it. That's all I've wanted. All summer, not to manage you, not to keep you. Just open the door 1 inch and let me earn it, and I'll spend the rest of my life doing nothing else." The storm howled. Her pulse was very loud. And the door she had been guarding all season swung open, on its own, 1 inch, and through it poured his cold and his sorrow, and his love, undisguised and unarmed, and entirely without a plan. "Not tonight," Orla said, "and not like this, not with you frozen half to death, and me too frightened to trust a word either of us says in a storm. You want an answer, Soren? Then, live through the night, and come down off this ridge, and ask me again when the sky is clear, and keep asking, because I mean to make you." She got her shoulder under his arm, and turned them both down the ridge toward the fires. "One of these mornings I might even surprise you." He came down off the ridge, and lived, as ordered. And then he asked. The next morning, with the sky gone clear, and every morning of that last green summer after, the winter wolf who had never once had to ask twice for anything, and the Luna of Dunmar, sending him off each day to try again tomorrow. And every morning Orla turned him down again. Not because she doubted, not anymore, but because she had spent her whole life being wanted for her use, and had discovered she would happily be wanted for nothing at all, for as long as the man could keep it up. Then one perfectly ordinary morning, with no storm and no crisis, and no bones anywhere in it, she looked across the breakfast fire at a gray wolf, grinning at her with a child on each knee, and a third asleep down his collar, and she said, yes. The whole of the marches came out for it, Verith and Dunmar both. 20 years of circling ended, and Emeric stood witness in the front rank and wept, and Orla had known he would. She did not quite, but it was a near thing. And the bond gave her away regardless, and Soren laughed at her through his own tears, and she stopped caring who saw. The triplets grew. Nell scolded hawks out of trees, with no regard for the difference in their sizes. Ivo grew into his silence, and his terrible honest stare, and there was never again a false reading told anywhere in the marches, because everyone knew the Luna's dark-eyed boy might be somewhere in the room. And Tam, the smallest, the one who had nearly not come at all, grew up mending things, quarrels, and wounds. And once, memorably, the last brittle grief between his mother and the gaunt Alpha across the river, simply by deciding the man was his and climbing into his lap at a moot until Emeric's careful face came apart. "You'll not be shut of us now," Soren murmured to her when the vows were done and the fires were lit. "The little ones settled that the night they were born. There's no arguing your way back out of it." "Why would I argue," said Orla, "when I'm the one they picked you for?" She tilted her head, and something of the tracker's old dryness came back into it. "Though I will have it set down, for the histories that I never once agreed to a single thing. I only ever told you to keep asking. And I did. And you did." She kissed him, and for once she did not argue at all. One might argue that if Imric had run his pack a little better, none of it would ever have happened. That a woman would not have frozen on a ridge, and 3 children would not have been born in an enemy's house, and a gray wolf would have gone on being the cold thing everyone said he was. So really, if one thought about it, honestly, the whole of this happy ending was his fault too. Every last bit of it. But that is not how the children tell it. Ask any of the 3, when they are old enough to tell it, And they will give you the same answer with the same maddening certainty. Because they were there and they were never once wrong about a man. They chose their father the night they were born. Everyone else just took a little longer to agree. Sao.